Hello, readers. I'm Amy, and I'm your nonfiction vampire. And we will see how long I can do this for, because I don't get how people talk like this. Also, hot tip, this lipstick took several tries and lots of wiping lipstick off of my fangs. I don't know how people do this. Maybe I'll get used to it, maybe I'll get better at it as the video goes on. Let's get this started. Today, I am talking about Dracula, the classic, most famous of all vampires. And we are going to get a look at my book collection. So, first copy of Dracula I ever got was one of the free classic copies on Kindle. And that one I still have, but it's kind of hard to show a Kindle on a screen. And then I got an old used copy at a bookstore whenever I was in college. That one I ended up giving away whenever I got some nicer editions. I moved in with Chris, and this is his copy of Dracula. This is one of the hardcover Barnes & Noble classics. He tried reading it and he couldn't get into it. Fangs are also kind of hard to keep on. Then I got the beautiful leather-bound copy from Barnes & Noble also. And this one has the black sprayed edges. I think it just looks really moody. I love this copy. I got two versions of the Barnes & Noble paperbacks because for some reason they have two versions. They have this cover with the lightning and the tower, and this one with the cross. Chris preferred this cover and I preferred this cover, so obviously I had to get them both. And lastly, on one of my vacations this summer, I picked up another copy of Dracula because I thought this cover just looked really fun. So, can you say it's one of my favorite books, like, ever? This blue copy is the one that I am currently reading back through, and I'm also annotating it. So, yeah. One of the frustrating things I'm finding with BookTube so far is everyone really focuses on Frankenstein. I did try Frankenstein once and it wasn't what I was expecting it to be. I think once I adjust my expectations and go back to it, I will enjoy it a lot more. I was just expecting it to have more action. But anyways, everyone focuses on Frankenstein. Everyone reads Frankenstein every year, and I feel like we forget about Dracula, which is also a famous monster classic, and I really think more people should read this, but I'm a little bit biased. This book, of course, has its problems, as it is a classic, but I love it nonetheless. I have loved it since my first read-through of it. I think I've read it maybe 6 or 7 times at this point. One of the things that I absolutely adore about Dracula is the style in which it is written. And Dracula is what is known as an epistolary novel. Epistolary means that it is written in diaries, journal entries, newspaper articles. I really love stuff that's like this. And in looking it up, the epistolary style is really used to keep the reader in real time with the characters. By jumping between characters, you will know more about what is going on than any individual character, which can really kind of build the intensity of the book that you're reading, build your frustration, make you want to read it more. I think it also just gives really great insight into who each of the characters are and what they're feeling and kind of their perspectives. To date, I have never read an epistolary style book that I have not loved. I loved Dracula, I loved Carrie. The Color Purple, that's an epistolary book because it's told in diary entries. So this novel starts off with Jonathan Harker. He is going on a trip through Transylvania. He's coming from London, and I think he is actually a realtor, or like a lawyer handling realty, something like that, at the time that this novel starts. It's like he had just finished his apprenticeship or something. So he's going to Transylvania to talk to Count Dracula about his move to London. And they're not really talking about the sale of a castle. I think the castle Dracula is keeping in ownership. He's just expanding his territory to buying property in London. And as he's traveling, he's remarking on, like, the different people. He talks about people whose race I cannot pronounce. And he's talking about, like, the different food that he's eating and how strange people are acting. The farther he goes on his journey, people start doing the sign of the cross and I think pointing 2 fingers at him, which is supposed to be, like, warding off the evil eye. And he understands, I think, like, some basic German, and he's trying to understand some of the different languages that people are using, or at least some of their words. He looks them up. He finds that they're talking about vampires and some other dark and creepy things. So he's just like, interesting. Wonder what's going on. And his last carriage that he gets in, they're just racing really, really hard to get to this meeting point with Dracula. And I think the idea is that the guy driving the carriage is trying to make sure they get there before the actual meeting time, so he can thus save Jonathan Harker and not have to meet up with Dracula and can just leave. But Dracula knows what's up. He meets them at the meeting point. Jonathan Harker gets in with him, but he doesn't know that it's Dracula at this point. He's this guy with a hat on that's kind of covering his face. He's got some facial hair, and can't really see much of who he is. They're driving through the night. And the other thing is that whenever he meets up with Dracula, I want to say it's like May 4th or something. It's supposed to be some dark night where the evil things kind of have free reign over the night, because, you know, that's how horror stuff like this tends to work out. And as they're going through, he's hearing the howling of the wolves, and he's getting really freaked out, and he doesn't know what's going on. They finally get to the castle, and the guy leaves him alone in front of the castle. He's alone in front of the castle for a long, long time. We know that Dracula, or we find out fairly early in the novel, that Dracula has left to kind of change his appearance, and then he goes back into the castle and opens the front door and welcomes Jonathan Harker into the building. The way he welcomes him into the building is very distinct, because he's like, I am welcoming you into my home. You have the freedom to enter. Because if you know anything about vampires, you need an invitation to enter. So I feel like it's kind of a politeness thing for him. So we're following him over a couple of days in this castle as things get weirder and weirder, and he's realizing that he is all alone in this castle, and the people who have been setting up his breakfast or getting his bed ready for him, it's all actually just this one person. He's feeling very alone, and then he starts to see the vampire things happening. And we keep cheering him on, like, you have to find a way out, you have to find a way out. And I guess I can't really talk about too much from there until we get to the spoiler section, which I will have a pop-up that says spoilers, and I will give you a minute to turn this off if you happen to be busy, so you don't have to listen to the spoilers. But anyways, before we get to the spoiler section, next up we meet up with Mina and Lucy, and this is where some more themes of the novel really start to take place. So the beginning of the novel is kind of an exploration of the Victorian ideas of foreign people and exploring foreign lands, and how everything seems a little lesser when you're coming from a civilized country in some ways. And when we meet Mina and Lucy, or really, back to the castle, we meet 3 vampire women at one point. They're very dangerous. They're very sexual. When we meet Mina and Lucy, who are the two main women characters in this novel, they are very pure and civilized. They are London ladies, and that distinction is really made, which when we figure out who is going to be the first victim of Dracula, it seems kind of obvious which choice it's going to be, because the particular person ends up being the more, not necessarily the more sexual of the two, because they're very pure people, but just a little more daring, a little less conventional. So you're like, oh, of course this person would end up being the first one to be the victim. So it's a real discussion on sexuality and how people should be very pure and keep to themselves and not really express themselves. Particularly female sexuality is really looked at in this book. So that's kind of like a general idea of what's going on in this book. As for reviews of this book, one of the reviews, which is pretty typical of any classic, is that it can be difficult to read. I personally have not found this book to be all that difficult for reading, with the exception of a part in the beginning where Mina is talking to a sailor. And so you have classic writing. You have classic writing, and then you have old-timey sailor speak, and on top of this, I think when I looked it up, it was supposed to be a Cockney accent or something. So what the sailor is trying to say is very hard to read. I suggest getting one of these annotated copies where it has the notes at the bottom of the page so you can get a better idea of what the sailor is trying to talk about. But writing-wise, I don't find this classic difficult at all. I just tried reading Henry James. He wrote The Turn of the Screw and the Aspirin Papers. I got through the Aspirin Papers. I got like halfway through The Turn of the Screw before I gave up. Henry James, for me, is very difficult to read. Jane Austen is a very popular classic author. I think people tend to find her fairly simple to read. In comparing the two styles, I personally feel that Stoker is a little easier to read than Jane Austen. That's personal feelings on it. Jane Austen, I love her, but if it's been a while since I've read her books, it takes me a little bit to get into her style. I feel that Stoker is more accessible, like a little bit more accessible. Again, everyone has their kind of personal tastes when it comes to classics, but hopefully this kind of gives you an idea of where this book sits as far as writing style. Another review that comes up, another thought that people bring up, is Dracula himself. A lot of people say that they are disappointed that Dracula does not show up in this book more. In my opinion, that's one of the things that I love about this book. This book isn't a history of Dracula. It's not an examination of Dracula as a character. It's an examination of what happens when you introduce this otherworldly thing into a civilized society. It's an examination of sexuality. It's an examination of social expectations. It's not necessarily an examination of the monster himself. That said, again, that's what I really love about this book. It reminds me of what Hermione says about Voldemort. I cannot remember the exact quote. It's about the fear of a name. So, by hearing about the dark and creepy thing, and seeing the effects of the dark and creepy thing, but without actually meeting the dark and creepy thing face to face, it can really build up that fear in your mind, because you haven't seen what you're facing yet. You just know that it's having disastrous effects, and it's this horrible, horrible thing. By not seeing a lot of Dracula, it's building up the fear of Dracula. My main issue with this book, I feel like very few people actually talk about, which I find very interesting, considering that most people know it as part of their basic medical education. Now, this book was written in 1897, or it was published in 1897. Now, most people are very aware that you cannot just donate blood to anybody that you want. People have blood types. Some people can donate to whomever they want, but definitely not everybody. You have to get your blood tested to find out who you are able to donate to. Dracula does not address that. In Dracula, there are so many blood transfusions, it's actually hilarious. They're trying to save one of the characters and keep them from turning into a vampire. And they're just donating blood willy-nilly. Again, this book was published in 1897. Blood types were discovered in 1900 to 1901. If I was Bram Stoker, I would have been pissed, because that would have added this whole other level to the story that we ended up missing out on. That's what really gets me. Most people in the reviews don't point that out. I don't know if they just don't notice it. But again, you can't just donate blood to whoever you want to donate it to. One of the things that I really loved about the writing in this book was one of the descriptions of Dracula that I feel like really sets the stage for the book. There's a part in the beginning of the book where Jonathan Harker first really discovers what he is living with currently. And he's looking into this coffin, well, it's not described as a coffin, it's a box. There's so many boxes of earth. I'm assuming Transylvanian earth. And he opens up one of the boxes and finds Dracula inside. And he describes what he sees. It seemed as if the whole awful creature were simply gorged with blood. He lay like a filthy leech, exhausted with his repletion. That really just set the tone for me. Like, I love that description of Dracula. I do think it sounds more like a tick than a leech. I discussed this with friends. I am not the only one who thinks that. But that sentence just gets me every time. Like, that sounds so disgusting and so creepy. Like, I really love the way this book is written. This is one of my top 2 favorite books in the world ever. I reread it practically every single year, along with Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. That is another super favorite book of mine. So, hopefully you will pick this up sometime. Again, I'm super biased and I absolutely adore this book. So, now it is time to talk about some spoilers. I do talk about one of the other criticisms with the book that discusses the ending of it. I'm not going to go too much into detail on what happens at the end. It's just more of a pacing situation. So here is your spoiler alert. If you don't want to hear the spoilers of the book, then please close out of this video. If you don't mind, or if you think it'll help to know what's going on in the book before you read it, like me whenever I'm reading classics, go ahead and continue to listen in. Are we ready? Okay, so, themes of sexuality. We meet Mina and Lucy at the beginning, and Mina is the pure of the two. She is engaged to Jonathan Harker. She is awaiting his return home. And Lucy she's like off in another town. They live in the same city, but she's like off visiting another town or something. And they're writing letters to each other. And Lucy gets proposed to 3 times in one day by 3 different guys. In Victorian terms, she's a bit of a whore. Like, she has all of these guys who are in love with her and proposing to her, and she's like, oh, I don't want to break their hearts. If only I could marry all 3 at once, and then no one would be sad. Like, her intentions are good, but still, she's a Victorian whore, is kind of what Stoker's trying to tell us. So, let's see, you have the pure, sweet, engaged woman who is trying to work hard to get ready for her simple life with her husband. And on the other hand, you have the woman who was proposed to 3 times in one day by 3 different men, Who's gonna turn into the vampire? Ding, ding, ding. Lucy is our winner because she is the more sexual of the two, just based on marriage proposals, because that's how they base whorishness in Victorian times, I guess. I didn't really catch this in my first few readings, but I looked up a bunch of the Spark Notes analyses on this book, which I do recommend reading because it does make it easier to understand what is going on in classics if you are struggling at all. I just wish that Spark Notes loaded and ran a little bit better. But anyways, one of the things that it brings up is it really focuses on the blood in the book and how with Lucy, like, her ties to these three men who love her really end up being this engagement of blood because they're giving her these blood transfusions to help her live. They're giving her pieces of themselves. Basically, the whole book is focusing on Victorian anxieties. But hey, I still love it, and that sounds like exactly the kind of book that I would read. As for one of the reviews, one of the cons that people bring up is the pacing in this book. A lot of the pacing is slower, like you're watching Jonathan Harker as he gets more and more freaked out in this castle. You're watching Lucy as she's slowly dying throughout the book. You're watching Mina as her strength is starting to be sapped after Lucy's death when Dracula starts to focus on her. And then towards the end, like, his grip on Mina is getting more and more powerful as he takes more and more of her life force. And then suddenly they're all traveling off to Transylvania, and the end comes very, very quickly, that part of the end. I don't really take too much issue with that pacing. Towards the end of the book, they're starting to get an idea of what they have to do to defeat Dracula. They're starting to track down each of the boxes of earth to put the holy wafer inside of it. And they're finding out, like, where he likes to hang out. He's realizing that he is being followed. He eventually decides to leave London and he runs off and they have to go chase him. So as far as order of events, to me, I feel that the ending felt fairly natural. But I understand how it could be too fast for some readers. So that's just a little bit of an idea of some of the spoilers of this book. I really recommend reading the analysis so you can really appreciate some of the sexual imagery and the sexual metaphors that are going on in this book. It's very Victorian. That said, I absolutely love this book. I highly recommend it to anyone interested in classics, especially in the little bit that I did read of Frankenstein that I recall reading. I feel like they're pretty much on the same level writing-wise. So if you can read Frankenstein, I feel that you should be able to get through Dracula as well. So that is it from me. I hope you enjoyed this review. You better have enjoyed the teeth because this was a job. Before I forget, because I almost forgot to tell you, this headband, I got it from Story Arts, and it contains a passage from Chapter 2 of Dracula, which is why I'm wearing this headscarf, because I love Dracula and I love this headscarf and totally recommend. I will leave a link in the description box down below where you can get yourself a Dracula headband or Pride and Prejudice or Sherlock Holmes. They also have bags and scarves. Also, hashtag not sponsored. But I should be because I shopped at Story Arts and I love all of their stuff. It's very good quality. I also have a Little Women scarf and a Pride and Prejudice pillowcase. But anyways, please like, subscribe, be my friend on social media or my victim, and ring the notification bell down below if you want to see some more videos from me, if you want to be updated on when I'm posting, which is generally Sundays and Wednesdays. So I will see you all in the next one. Have a happy and creepy Halloween. Bye, friends.